Welcome. Welcome everybody to the first module for MAP project. I'm Raffaella Scalisi, psychologist and birth operator, and also one of the founding members of Melograno Association Information Center for Maternity and Birth, Rome. As you know, this is the association that has set up and implemented the project Pregnancy and Birth Without Violence. I'd like to introduce Melograno. Melograno is an association, a no-profit association promoting a human-centered and healthy approach to pregnancy, childbirth, and maternity. The Melograno in Rome is part of the national association called Il Melograno, which has several centers widespread across Italy, sharing the same goals and same mission. In Rome, we were set up in March 1983, so we are almost 40 years old. And since our beginning, we wanted to create a multidisciplinary team consisting of different professionals, gynecologists, psychologists, psychotherapists, midwives, and birth health assistants, because we wanted to make sure that birth had a multidisciplinary approach. We can't just consider the physical body approach, the health approach, but there are many more dimensions. We have the psychological dimension, the intimacy dimension, and also the social dimension in birth. So our mission was immediately to accompany women and their partners in their experience of maternity, from pregnancy into labor, postpartum, breastfeeding, and the early parenting. Well, because, continuity in assistance, this is one of our main goals. So Melograno represents a point of reference for women who want to experience maternity and childbirth, respecting their own subjectivity and choices. Melograno promotes a culture of birth that respects the physiological rhythm of childbirth, the intimacy, the emotional needs of the couple and the child, following the indications of WHO. It guarantees and supports the continuity of assistance in the whole period, from pregnancy to childbirth to the puerperium and early childhood. So the first 1,000 days of the child, the most fundamental ones for the development of the child and also in order to become parents. Melograno facilitates the socialization among women, sharing experience of maternity. This is also very important. That is to say, we want to allow them to share and socialize. And it also supports the families from pregnancy to early childhood, respecting social, cultural differences. Why that? Because, the needs of every couple, of every woman and every family have to be respected. Each one has different needs, and for each one of them, we have a tailor-made approach. What do we do? Our sectors of intervention are several, many. We provide information, socialization, and support to women during the first 1,000 days through pregnancy, childbirth, and early childhood. And we also deal with training, refresh courses, and seminars for psychosocial and health professionals working in the mother and child health sector, through training courses, workshops, seminars, master courses in collaboration with the National Melograno School and the 1,000 Day School. We also offer parental support programs addressed above all to vulnerable families who are exposed to different types of risks. We also raise awareness among the community through conferences, forums, and other public initiatives. We also produce, we have produced several publications from books to information materials in order to increase awareness and in order to talk about these topics related to birth. All right, so after this very first and brief presentation about Melograno, now let's talk about our project. Pregnancy and birth without violence. And in particular, I'd like to talk about violence and pregnancy. There is a connection which is difficult to imagine. We will also talk about how pregnancy can be a window of opportunity. And we will also have a look at the project Pregnancy and Birth Without Violence, the project. As I said, the main goal is to talk about violence and pregnancy. This is quite difficult to approach as a topic because it's quite hard to think that there might be a connection between violence and pregnancy, of course. You know, it might sound unthinkable. Pregnancy, by culture, is seen as a happy moment in the life of a family and of a woman, so it is unthinkable to put it next to violence and suffering. And if we consider violence on the woman by the partner or former partner, and we know that this is the most common type of violence, but also very hidden type of violence, well, people think that pregnancy has a protective function. But research shows clearly that pregnancy doesn't avoid violence, doesn't hinder violence. Well, actually, this time period is a period characterized by violence, sometimes due to the changing needs of the woman. There is a more vulnerability that, increases the gap in terms of power between men and women, and therefore gender violence, and also the cultural vision of the family as a safe place, a place for protection. Well, this is the image that contributes to hide and to tolerate violence exercised by the partner, and it makes it difficult for women to talk about it and to ask for help. It is a taboo, but unfortunately we know that reality is different from common sense. Gender violence is a public problem. It is a real epidemic. There are many international studies that show very worrying data. There is an estimate saying that in the world, at least one woman out of four has been a victim of a form of violence during pregnancy. In the world, there is an incidence of violence during pregnancy from 1 to 20% for all pregnancies. According to some other studies, probably more realistic, between 3.9 and 8.3%. But we will see this data later on with a second module. Not only this, there's another aspect connecting pregnancy and violence, and it is related to violence episodes, sexual abuse that were inflicted in the past, especially during childhood, and they can come back during the perinatal period. Some characteristics of pregnancy, breastfeeding, but also of labor, for example, the pain that we see in labor, the intensity of labor, and also the maneuvers done during labor, it can trigger the flashback of violence the woman was a victim of during labor. There could be reactions, very intense reactions to pain. There could be panic attacks, which cause some problems. During pregnancy, a woman could decide not to be followed by a midwife, not accept obstetrician examinations or blood tests. Or the woman might feel very insecure, unable to make decisions also after the birth of the child, when there might be some feelings based on depression, for example. We will talk about this aspect later on during another module. So, despite all the stereotypes related to gender violence during the perinatal period, Violence exists during this period, and it has its own specific characteristics because it is exercised on the woman as a woman and also on the woman as a mother. It is inflicted on both mother and child. They are both victims of it, the mother and the child, and both of them will have damages on their physical and emotional health. And it will also affect the relationship between mother and the child, which is fundamental in the first periods of the child's life. This relationship allows to build that binding relationship that is at the base of the child's development. Pregnancy with violence is a pregnancy at risk. However, despite all of this, still today gender violence violence during the perinatal period is underestimated still. It is quite difficult to see it. We have to resist to overcome resistance and obstacles. Let's have a look at why women don't talk about it. Why don't they disclose violence, especially during pregnancy? There are many factors of it, and we can list the main ones. They could have a fear of reprisals on the child by the partner. They might have a fear of losing the financial support. They feel they have no options for the child, or fear of losing custody. They have a fear of not being trusted or of being stigmatized due to the stereotypes we just mentioned. In case of foreign women, they might have a fear of drawing attention to the illegal immigration status or losing the legal status following the separation from the abusive spouse. As well as difficulties for women, there are also some other obstacles for health and social operators who are in contact with women. Why don't operators ask? Why don't they investigate on violence? There might be many obstacles. First of all, there might be insufficient knowledge of the causes and consequences of perinatal violence. There might be prejudice and stereotypes on the operator that might be linked to personal experiences. They might lack of clinical skills. They might not have the right tools, internal protocols, and specific procedures in order to understand the problem and the underlying needs of women. There might be a lack of information on existing support services to refer the women to. Many operators say, well, okay, once the woman reveals violence to me, I don't know where to refer her to. In my hospital, I don't have contacts with anti-violence centers or services that deal with this problem. Or there might be also some uncertainties related to the legislation on confidentiality and obligation to report. Well, this depends on the law in every country. So what happens when violence is not expressed by women and it is also underestimated by the operators? This phenomenon is always kept in the dark, and therefore very often there's no protection, no support offered to women. And obviously, as a consequence, the violence remains. There's a permanence of violence, and also there's a lack of support to parenting. At the same time, pregnancy represents a huge opportunity in order to intercept violence. Why? Well, because, nowadays almost all pregnant women receive continuous perinatal care. And so it is quite easy to establish a relationship between the woman and the healthcare professionals, especially midwives. And also the woman's motivation to be a good mother is high, that she has a desire to protect the child. And she also wants to invest in the future. in a document dating back to 2013, WHO says healthcare providers are in a unique position in order to create a safe and confidential environment to facilitate disclosure of violence while offering appropriate support and referral to other resources and services. Well, the fact of not catching this opportunity and not seeing represents a form of collusion. Silent is collusion. Being aware of it all and also being aware of the responsibilities we have. As Melograno, we have created this project. The title is Pregnancy and Birth Without Violence for the Prevention and Fight Against Perinatal Domestic Violence. The project was conceived with the scientific supervision of the Italian National Institute of Health in collaboration with 2 hospitals from Rome, San Giovanni Addolorata Hospital and Casilino Polyclinic, and also with the obstetrician sector of ASL Roma 2. Now I'm going to give you an overview of the project, and then we will have our other modules going deeper into other details. The main purpose of the project is to increase the attention on different forms of perinatal violence. And so we wanted to set light on this topic. The specific goals are, well, mainly 3 objectives. First of all, increase the possibility for health and social professionals to early detect women who suffer violence during the perinatal period, and also promote women's greater awareness on the unspoken need for help. And 3, increase the offer for integrated support and protection services with respect to both existing the condition of violence, motherhood, and parenting. This 3rd objective is very important, because we always realized, especially in the last few years, we have realized that there's a lack, which is not highlighted by literature, but we have detected it in our daily practice. That is to say, there's a lack of consideration of the dimension of motherhood inside projects related to women who are gender violence victims. Of course, well, these projects want to help women go out of violence, but we have to consider that these women are going to become mothers, and therefore they need more support, a more specific support. How have we worked? Well, first of all, we have set up a multidisciplinary working group with operators, mainly midwives, but also gynecologists and psychologists. And then we had training for the entire working group aimed at achieving the project objectives. And then after training, we started a testing activity about the applicability of methodologies and tools identified in order to identify perinatal violence. And actually, this was the most central part of the project. And the initial training continued later on. And then at the end, we evaluated the experience, we drafted a report with guidelines, and we also created an online platform for the publication of the report with the guidelines and also some other materials on violence during the perinatal period. Now I'd like to dwell on the experimentation. This stage was actually the central part of the project, the heart of the project. I'd like to clarify something about the word experimentation. We don't mean scientific research with this word, but actually we refer to our first experimental activity on the field. We tried to understand if and how it is possible to add to the already existing tools in order to identify gender violence we try to see if it is possible to identify some other methodologies and tools in order to favor the detection and contrast to perinatal violence. So we wanted to verify the applicability and effectiveness of specific methodologies and tools in order to favor the detection and contrast to perinatal violence. And based on literature, according to which the perinatal period is one of the conditions where it is preferable to regularly investigate on violence, we decided to carry out 3 screening activities in the workplace and also together with the operators. So in the maternity rooms of the hospitals and also in the 4 ASL centers and also at Melograno. The first screening activity was about having interviews by using a short questionnaire. Second screening activity was carried out based on self-completed questionnaires by women without the interview. And then the third one was through interviews during home visiting interventions carried out by Melograno. With regard to the first screening activity, so the one based on interviews and questionnaire, well, we based our activity referring to Modena. They started using a program in Modena in 2012, and based on that, we created a questionnaire that was based on several questions. First of all, the 5 questions from the abuse assessment screen. And this is a tool validated in America. And there is also an Italian version that has not been validated yet. But anyhow, it is the one that was used in Modena. These questions are about having been sexually abused by the partner or other family members. And we also added 3 more questions regarding having been sexually abused at an earlier age, and also sharing with the partner the choice of getting pregnant and any access to ER in the last year. And also, we also indicated a suspicion indicators table correlated to perinatal violence. The operators had to fill it in based on the direct observation during the screening interview. We also defined very clearly the procedures for implementing the screening, and we also defined the care pathway for those women resulting to be victims of violence or the suspected cases of violence. So support and care pathways in order to support them during motherhood, and also in order to allow them to go out of violence, of the violent condition. Of course, we will have a module going deeper into these topics later on. Together with the screening, Melograno also offered maternity support activities to 27 women who resulted positive to the screening. So we had activities in order to favor the creation of a safe relationship. We therefore decided to have 4 different types of support. First of all, home visiting after birth, and we will talk about it during the next module, and also advice and meetings for breastfeeding. And we know that as well as being very beneficial for the child's health, it is also a protection factor for women, for the mother. And a baby massage for promoting skin-to-skin contact. This is the reassurance vehicle for newborns, and this is very important for women who are victims of violence from their partner, and also support groups between mothers. And as I said earlier, we will give you more details later on during the next modules. And then during the last stage, the entire activity was evaluated. We filled in, we filled in a report, and we also set up some guidelines based on our experience. And we also created an online platform for the dissemination of the project results, but above all, in order to disseminate our materials, in order to open up a space for meeting and exchange of views among operators. Let's have a look at some of the project results, the general results. So in the screening activity, we had 827 women in the different places where we carried out our screening activities. Out of 827, 730 belong to screening 1, 75 screening 2, and 22 to screening 3. The women who resulted positive, that is to say victims of perinatal violence, based on our definition, we had 93 women resulting positive, in total of which 40 declared they were victims of violence during this pregnancy, the present pregnancy, 42 previously, and 11 both during the pregnancy and also earlier. Table number 2 shows us the types of violence which came out during the screening. I'd like to specify that the total number is higher than the number of women detected because several women were victims of more than one type of violence. And anyhow, 23 women were victims of physical violence, 35 psychological violence, 6 sexual violence, 10 economical violence, 5 stalking, 27 declared they were victims of physical and or psychological violence previously. 26 were victims of sexual abuse before they were 14 years old, and 12 sexual abuse after 14 years old. Table number 3 shows us who is the perpetrator of violence. And here you can see a confirmation of what we see in the literature. So gender violence is predominantly inside intimate relationships. 31 suffered violence from the partner, 6 of them from the former partner, the ex-partner. 16 women were victims of violence perpetrated by another family member, 20 by another person that has not been specified, 10 by the partner and also other people, and 10 women didn't say. It was not possible to know who the perpetrator was. And last, now I'd like to dwell on the important results of screening 1, that is to say screening carried out with the interviews and the questionnaire. This tool resulted to be very efficient because it allowed us to detect a high percentage, compared to literature, higher percentages of women in pregnancy or puerperium who resulted positive, 54 out of more than 600, so 7.4%. As you remember, as I said in the beginning, there are some studies that show the incidence of violence during pregnancy between 3.9 and 8.3. So this is very important data. And we will explain it later on during the next modules. This screening is universal. I mean, we carried out the screening on all women that had access to our services, but it was only limited on some days. So it was, let's say, a reduced universality. We decided to establish only a few days during which to carry out our screening, and we decided to carry out the screening on all women that came to our services on those set days. However, despite this limitation, the percentage of women victims of violence is high, 7.4. The same tool also allowed to identify some types, some forms of violence that often are not considered as such by the women. And often the risks are ignored or underestimated. And in fact, there was a high number of women who declared that they underwent psychological violence during pregnancy puerperium, 35, or they said they were victims of previous psychological violence, before pregnancy, 27 women, and 26 women declared they were victims of violence during childhood or adolescence. So these are the results for us. These results are extremely meaningful because we wanted to verify the applicability and the efficacy of tools in order to identify violence during perinatal period. We had a confirmation, that is to say, that this tool, even if it has some limitations, and we will have to make a few changes as we will describe later on, but anyhow, our tool has been very important and very efficient. This is all from me, and see you later on. I will see you later on. I will tell you more about the screening activity. Thank you.